Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today is the beginning of our lecture for lesson number 6. We are going to be following up on the recording that you just watched for number 5 on learning, classical conditioning. And today we're going to be doing some briefing about operant conditioning, that is consequence-based learning. And as I previewed you before, hopefully you're going to be learning about something that I teach people when I work with them at the hospital. I'd like to start with a couple of cleanup things. First of all, I'm hoping that all of you have checked the syllabus and know that our first quiz is on 10/26, available to you on 10/26. And that will be an essay quiz, and that will be due that Friday at midnight. So I'm asking you to be aware of that. It'll be in your assignment section and available to you Monday in the morning, and then you'll be able to hand it in by the end of the week. Additionally, I'd like to make sure that everybody is working on their presentation. I've heard from many of you regarding your proposed topics. Most of them have been very good so far. Remember to keep it narrow and focused, not broad and general. If you're doing something that I would be doing for a lesson plan, or even just reading a chapter in the book, that's not what you'd want to do. You want to make it narrower and focused, like a case review type of presentation. So that's a little cleanup. Now I'd like to go back to our lesson. And so we're going to start with operant conditioning. And so I'd like to give you just a basic definition that I'd like to work from. And that is that it is learned behavior that is more or less likely to occur in the future based upon the consequences of that behavior. So what does that mean? Well, when you really break it down, what it means is that whatever follows a behavior is more likely to make it reoccur or happen again, or it's more likely to make it not happen again. And that's going to be the difference between what we call reinforcement and punishment. Let's start by looking at a model for reinforcement. Positive reinforcement means that the behavior is followed by something that would make the behavior more likely to increase or to reoccur again. So that would be something like if you are trying to teach your child to do math problems and they do one successfully, you give them an M&M, right? And that's a positive reinforcement. It's not positive because it's good. It's positive because in the way we term things in science, positive means adding something to, right? Negative, on the other hand, is going to mean subtracting something away, okay? So it's not good and bad when we talk about science and positive and negative. It's whether or not something's added or removed. So when we talk about positive reinforcement, we're talking about adding something to the situation to make the behavior increase. So in the case of the math problem and the M&M, you can see how giving a child an M&M following completion of a successful math problem would want to make him or her do it again. So therefore we call it a positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement can come in a lot of different forms. If you praise somebody and say, great job, you did a great job, and it makes them motivated to do the behavior again, that can be a positive reinforcement. Praise, certainly, as I said, giving somebody something that they've always wanted, access to something like watching TV, all of those things could potentially be deemed as positive reinforcement. Now we get to something a little trickier, which is negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is not the opposite of positive reinforcement. And the reason why is because when you see the word reinforcement there, it always means that the behavior is going to go up. That's the definition of reinforcement. So if I put the word negative in front of reinforcement, it's not punishment. It means that I am subtracting something or taking something away in order to make behavior increase. This is a trickier concept. Let's talk about the behavior that refers to aspirin taking. So you get a headache, right? And when you get a headache, you are motivated to get rid of that headache, right? And so in order to eliminate that aversive stimulus, what do? You take an aspirin or a Tylenol, whatever. And in taking that Tylenol or the aspirin, the uh, headache goes away. When that happens, you have removed the headache, and so because of that, you say it's a negative reinforcement because you've removed the headache, which makes the aspirin taking when you have another headache more likely to reoccur, right? Give you another example of negative reinforcement because this one's a little harder to wrap your brain around. If you get in a new car, right, and this happens to me all the time, if you get in a new car and you don't put your seatbelt on right away, the seatbelt starts to ding, right? And when I get in the car with my wife, her seatbelt starts to ding and it gets progressively faster and louder and more annoying. And I say, put on your seatbelt, right? So what happens is the presence of this aversive situation, that is the dinging that gets louder and louder, that gets really, really annoying. In order to alleviate that, you have to buckle your seatbelt. Okay? So the elimination of the annoying dinging is what reinforces the behavior of putting on your seatbelt. And so in the future, she's more likely to put her seatbelt on more quickly. Hello? Let's make it happen. So that is another good example of negative reinforcement. I'll give you one more example because, again, this is a little bit tricky. When I worked with United Cerebral Palsy, and we were working with people to try to keep their heads erect, because this way you get people that aren't looking at you when their heads tilt all the way to the side, and it makes them harder for them to process language and communication. So we would want to reinforce them for keeping their head erect and straight and paying close attention to the people in front of them. And the way we did this, we attached to the head what we call a mercury switch, and that switch has a bubble in it, like a level. And when the bubble got too much to one side as the head tilted, it would set off a buzzer, an annoying little buzzer, like the seatbelt. And it would motivate the person to bring their head back up into a straight up position, therefore turning off the annoying buzzer. So that's another example for you of what we call negative reinforcement. Now let's go to punishment, because I think this belongs in this spot, right? So let's talk about punishment. And what does punishment mean? Well, basically, like reinforcement means that the behavior by definition is increasing. By definition, the behavior with punishment is either decreasing or less likely to occur. This is really important to know, because we also can term things either a positive punishment or a negative punishment. Now again, this could potentially be confusing if you thought of positive and negative as good and bad. But we're not going to think of it like that, right? We're going to think of positive and negative as the scientific positive and negative. So the positive punishment means that you are adding something, right? Positive, adding something to the situation in order to make behavior decrease or less likely to occur. So it's not positive good punishment, because that would be an oxymoron. It is actually, what it means is that you're adding something to the situation so that behavior will decrease. So what could be a positive punishment? Well, anything that you add to the situation to make behavior more likely to go down is deemed a positive punishment. So if you spank someone, then that could be termed a positive punishment, because you're adding something to the situation and you hope that it'll decrease the tantruming behavior, right? There are a number of other things that we can deem positive punishment, right? So positive punishment would be yelling at somebody. That would be adding your scolding of somebody in order to help make a behavior decrease. So if your child exhibits a behavior like running out of their chair or running when they're supposed to be walking, you might turn around and say, "Hey, stop that." and you hope that that behavior will decrease because you have made it clear that you want that behavior to decrease. So by adding your scolding to the situation, you hope that it will be a positive punishment, that it'll make the behavior decrease, right? So certainly you could do that, use that as a positive punishment. Also, something like, if you focus your eyes on somebody, like give them the look, like, hey, you better cut that out. That's a positive punishment. Why? Because you're adding your look with hopes that the behavior that just happened will not reoccur again, right? So I know that some of you out there have given the eye, right? The evil eye, like, you better not do that again, especially if you're a parent. And that would be deemed a positive punishment because you're adding your look to the situation to hopefully decrease behavior. So where does that leave us with negative punishment? Well, go back to the definitions, right? The negative part of negative punishment is not bad. It means that we're subtracting something from the situation in order to make behavior decrease or less likely to reoccur. So what could we deem as a negative punishment? It has nothing to do with good or bad, right? Negative simply means that we are withholding something. We're taking something away to decrease behavior. So an example of this would be, let's say you've given your child a car, the use of a car, but they have a curfew and they come in late and violate the curfew. You say, can I have the keys to the car? You violated curfew. And I don't want that to happen again. So by removing the access to the car, you are decreasing or hoping to decrease the behavior, right? What are the types of negative punishment? Well, anything that you deny access to. So let's say you tell your child, well, you didn't do your homework, so therefore you can't watch TV tonight. Or you didn't eat your vegetables at dinner, so therefore you lose your access to your dessert. Anywhere where there's a removal of something in order to make something decrease, behavior decrease, or less likely to recur, we call that a negative punishment. Okay, so let's review these concepts very quickly. And it really makes it easier if you set up a little grid and you say, okay, the word positive, that means adding something to the situation, right? So anytime I see the word positive, it means adding to the situation. So if you're going to add positive reinforcement, it's giving someone a cookie. It's giving someone praise, right? That it makes it positive. I'm adding something to in order to make behavior increase. Negative reinforcement, I'm removing something that I don't want there that's aversive, an aversive noise, a sound, a light, whatever it might be. I'm removing that in order that behavior will increase, right? So by removal of something, behavior must increase. Positive punishment, basically you're referring to adding something to the situation in order to make behavior decrease, like yelling at somebody or spanking them or whatever type of punishment you want to do. And negative punishment would be removing something that a person desires access to in order to make behavior decrease or less likely to occur. Okay? So those are the four definitions, and you'll be able to keep it straight if you follow these basic rules. Positive anything, adding something to. Negative anything, taking something away. Reinforcement, behavior must be by definition going up. And punishment, how do we know? Well, behavior must by definition be going down or less likely to occur. So it's a little tricky, but it's easily remembered if you can recall the basic tips that I just gave you. So let's talk a little bit about, I promised you that I would give you some of the explanation of things that I give people at work when I teach them. And what I'm going to do is talk about a study that I did in 1985. Yes, that dates me a bit, but that's okay. And in 1985, I did a study, and the basic findings of that study were reinforcement is relative. And so what does this mean? What does the statement reinforcement is relative means? Well, basically what that means is it's relative in two specific ways. Reinforcement is relative to the person or animal that you're giving the reinforcement to, and reinforcement is relative to the time and place of delivery. These two basic concepts sound very simple and obvious. But as I said, many of the people that I train in psychology don't actually grasp some of the aspects of this that are so important. So let's think about a topic. How do we give an example of the concepts that I just gave you? Reinforcement is relative. Well, let's talk about chocolate sundaes, right? I'm sure there's many of you out there that could appreciate a hot fudge sundae, right? And so what happens if we make an agreement with you? We'll take you and the rest of the class as a witness, and we'll make an agreement that all you have to do is sign your name, and then you get a free Baskin Robbins hot fudge sundae. Or if you prefer something else, you can choose something else, right? So now we take you out to Baskin Robbins and we say, okay, let's order your first hot fudge sundae. And you say, okay, sounds good. You're paying, I'm eating. And you sign your name as agreed, and you get presented a hot fudge sundae. Well, it's at that point you want to eat your sundae, and that's a positive reinforcement, right? Behavior is increasing. So you eat your sundae, and then the class says, okay, you agreed that if you sign your name, you'll get a free sundae, so let's do it again. And you sign your name again. And you get your free hot fudge sundae. Oh, and that's great. And you're still a little hungry, right? So you eat your sundae and you say, good, that's great, but I'm kind of getting full. And we say to you, wait a minute, you agreed to sign your name and get a free hot fudge sundae. So we kind of encourage you to do that, and you sign your name, and sundae number 3 comes your way. And now you're starting to get a little full, but you manage to squeeze it in somehow because you're a good eater, and that hot fudge is delicious. And so you squeeze down the 3rd sundae, and then we say, okay, now it's time to get another free sundae, sign your name. And you say, no, 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 I had enough. But we make you sign your name, right? And you sign your name, and then we start to force you into eating that 4th hot fudge sundae. And what happens? You give it back to us in a different form, right? Well, what happened here? What happened to the idea of positive reinforcement? Something that starts out as a positive and ends up as not such a positive. So if you start with the premise that you want a hot fudge sundae, right? We've asked you that, and you say that it's a reinforcer for you. What has happened in such a short space of time? Well, what basically happened was what was a positive reinforcement now has not only become neutral, but it's actually become something that's aversive to you. It actually becomes a punisher, something that started out being reinforcing. So where does this fit in with reinforcement is relative? Okay, well, let's go back to the definitions I gave you. It's relative to the person or animal it's being given to. Well, we don't want to give a rat bird feed, right? We don't want to give a bird rat pellets. We don't want to give humans bird feed in order to reinforce them. We got to give them something that is reinforcing to them, right? So we have to ask you beforehand, do you like hot fudge sundaes? And if you say yes, then that becomes a potential positive reinforcer. But we have to start with the idea that we have a reinforcing event for you that's relative to you as the person or animal, right? So you got to pick the right reinforcer. How do you do that? Well, you can ask someone, right? If you ask someone and they say, yeah, I love this, then you certainly can use what they suggest. That would be a good thing. Or if someone is a child or is incapable of responding for themselves, you can do a survey, a reinforcement survey with staff members that are working with the person, or you can just offer the person different things and see how they respond. And if they respond in a positive manner, then you could put it into the repertoire for your positive reinforcements. Many times I like to use music or some other form of reinforcement. It has to be relative to the particular person that you're working with. A good example of this, when I was working as a consultant with OPW, Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities, I had a case where I was working with a client that was relatively low functioning client, had an IQ below 20. So he was dependent for almost everything that he did. And I was given the assignment of helping him to build the ability to feed himself. And so I started with trying to get a good reinforcer, and everything I gave him, he wasn't really that enthusiastic about. He ate a little cookies, but really food was not a great reinforcer for him. So I had to find the reinforcer that was relative to him. So what did I do? Well, I gave him my hand at one point, right? I put my hand in his, and he took my hand and he put it to his nose, right? And he was moving my hand around his nose like this, right? So I was trying to figure out, he was nonverbal, he couldn't tell me what he wanted, but he seemed to want that type of touch, something with his nose, right? So I loosened my hand after he exhibited a behavior that I wanted him to exhibit. I loosened my hand and he put my hand to his nose and he moved it up and down, up and down. Well, after a little while of refining this, I realized that the bridge of his nose was very sensitive, and if I did this after a desired behavior, he was willing to work for me. He was willing to do things that I was asking him to do. So just by allowing myself to think outside the box, I was able to discover that he liked the idea of his nose, the bridge of his nose being rubbed back and forth. That was a more effective reinforcer than food would be for this particular person. So what happens to food reinforcers? We started with the idea of a chocolate sundae being great and reinforcing, and all of a sudden it became this aversive thing, this punishment. Well, what happens is that the reinforcement hits, especially food reinforcement, hits a level of satiation. That's the key word, satiation. Excuse me. Satiation is the definition of that is it's lost its reinforcing properties, whatever it is. In a word, in a layman's word, you become full. When you get full, the idea of consuming food of any sort is no longer reinforcing. So that goes to the second part of the time and place of delivery. We made sure that you were being reinforced by using a hot fudge sundae that you wanted. So it was relative to you as a person, for most of you out there. But we didn't take into account the time and place of delivery, because if you just continually give someone hot fudge sundaes, at some point they lose their reinforcing property. That is what we call satiation. And that's what you have to watch out for. The reason this is so important is because you may need a broad range of reinforcers in order to engage someone on an ongoing basis. Why? Well, simply put, would you continue to work for the same things over and over and over again? Not if you hit the level of satiation, not if they lose their reinforcing property. So I gave you the example of food reinforcers getting satiated, and that's why if I use like cookies or crackers as a reinforcement, I don't ever give someone a whole cookie or a pack of cookies in order to reinforce. If I'm asking for multiple behaviors, I'll break off a piece of a cookie maybe into 2 or 4 pieces and use that so we slow down the idea of getting full so quickly, right? So that's one thing. If you're using music as a reinforcer or praise, you want to mete out the praise in small increments so that it doesn't become too much. If you're using music as a reinforcer, you might want to get a variety of music so that you don't keep using the same song or the same artist over and over. I have a good example of that. I had a patient who really liked Mariah Carey, and so she asked me to play Mariah Carey when she was doing the work as a reinforcer, and I said, yes, we can do that. But after a while, having the same album that Mariah Carey produced, it was limited in the type of songs that I could give her. So after a while she said, I like these songs, but I'm getting tired of them. Can we get another type of Mariah Carey album? And so I was able to do that. Now she was able to verbalize that to me, but as the clinician, I also have to keep in mind that if I allow satiation to happen, it's going to lose its reinforcing properties. That's why many times if you start a behavior program, in order to carry over the effect of that behavior program, you really need to offer a variety of reinforcers, not just the same reinforcer every single time. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're setting the program. So we know why reinforcement is relative to the person or animal. So like I said, we want to give dogs dog food and not give them bird food, because they wouldn't like that too much as a reinforcer. So it's important to know that you're giving somebody a reinforcement, something that they would like. And remember the fact that not all of you out there, when I said hot fudge sundae, would find that a reinforcer. Some of you would say, I like ice cream, but I like it with caramel topping. Or you might say, I don't like ice cream at all. I'd rather prefer a pastry. So that comes under the category of it's relative to the person or animal also. You got to make sure that you're reinforcing your subject if you want to motivate them with something that you know that they'll work for. And that's why people oftentimes, if they're trying to get someone motivated, will use the ultimate reinforcer, which is money. Now, what's so good about money? Well, money can be used to purchase other reinforcers, but we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. I have something else to point out about that. So we took care of, you have to take care up front of making sure your reinforcer is relative to that person. And so it's something that they want, they find appetitive, that they will work for. And then you have to take into the account the idea of satiation and making sure that someone is not getting too full or sick of the reinforcer that you're giving them, right? So when we put animals into reinforcement experiments like Skinner did and run many rats and pigeons at the same time in order to get their experiments, we have to make sure that they haven't all been eating all day, otherwise they're not going to be motivated to earn their reinforcer, right? So oftentimes, if it's the day that they're going into an experiment, the experimenter will pull away 20 or 25% of their regular eating food, so that they are hungry going into the experiment and henceforth motivated, okay? And this is good practice, and it's called deprivation, and we do send animals into experiments in somewhat of a state of deprivation in order to motivate them, right? Now, if we're talking about time and place of delivery, let's give the example of whether or not, if you're taking a class, let's say you, back in the old days when we used to actually go to class instead of having everything virtual, you might decide to take a class with your significant other, right? And on the way into class, the person walking with you says, "Oh, honey, you're so special," and gives you a nice kiss. And you find that is a reinforcing event, right? Because relative to everything surrounding you, it's a positive experience. And then you go into the classroom, and the person, the significant other you're taking the class with, decides during the class to turn and start trying to give you a kiss while the class is going on. And you say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! It's class time." And you get embarrassed. Well, it's the same event that's occurring just a short time later, but you can see that now it actually becomes an aversive event, the same exactive event. And that's because time is sensitive. It's relative to time and place of delivery. That is not the right time or place to be receiving affection from your significant other. So it begs the question, if reinforcement is relative, then is punishment also relative in the same way? And guess what? The answer is yes, punishment is relative. It's relative to the particular person or animal that you're dealing with. A good example of this, my dog likes me to give him positive reinforcement by really hitting him with force on his rear end, and he finds that a reinforcing event. He likes to be, potched, if you will, with a strong hand. That he finds reinforcing. Whereas if you did that to a different dog or to a child, they would maybe find that a punishing event, and it would decrease their likelihood. So you can see that for each individual, whether it be a person, an animal, it doesn't matter, reinforcement is relative to that person, because what you find reinforcing, I might not, but the person next to you might find reinforcing. And the same thing with punishment. What you find punishing, may not be a punishing event for the person next to you. Like, do you know people that might enjoy spanking? Probably, and that would mean that punishment would not be spanking someone would not be a punishment, but a reinforcer. Um, you know, so there are many examples of things that some people find tasteful and some people find distasteful, like a dish with broccoli in it. Does everybody like broccoli? No. Some people would find that a punishment. Some people would find that a reinforcer. So you can see now that reinforcement is relative, and in the same way, punishment is also relative to the particular individual. So let's talk about one other thing, which is developing behaviors, right? And we're going to talk about, before we do that, so when we talk about reinforcers, there are two separate categories of reinforcers that we want to talk about, just to clarify. The first category is the primary reinforcers. Primary reinforcers, by definition, satisfy a basic biological need, right? So three things come to mind as primary reinforcers. Water, certainly you could use as a reinforcer if you were water deprived. That's a basic need. Food, because using edibles is oftentimes reinforcing event. Sex is a basic need. Could you use that as a reinforcer? Possibly. Maybe not in an experiment, but it has been done with rats. And shelter also, is a basic need, so you can use that as a primary reinforcer. Secondary reinforcers they gain their reinforcing property through the association or pairing with a primary reinforcer, right? So I'll give you two good examples of secondary reinforcers. One is the ultimate reinforcer we talked about before, which is money, right? So money is a great secondary reinforcer. Why isn't it a primary reinforcer? Because money can't be eaten. It could be, but it's not going to be a very reinforcing event. It doesn't help to rub it on your body, although some people might like to do that. The primary experience with money is not particularly reinforcing. It's the secondary gain that you can get. The idea that money is reinforcing because you can pair it by getting any of the primary reinforcers. So you can pay for food, water, sex, shelter, everything with money, and that's why it becomes such a powerful secondary reinforcer. But another example of a secondary reinforcer would be something like the grades you get for a class, right? So getting an A in a class will help you to certainly it can be paired with many things. The A itself doesn't really give you a primary reinforcement. It doesn't feed you, it doesn't clothe you, it doesn't give you sexual pleasure to get an A, although you never know. But basically, it's none of those primary things. It's really the pairing with those things. Now, how is getting an A somehow paired with a biological need? Well, think about this. If you get an A in a class, you're more likely to get into a better four-year college. If you get into a better four-year college, you're able to make more of a living, which gives you the money that you need in order to pair with getting more primary reinforcers. So that A in the long term will help you to be able to have more purchasing power, which will help you get a better house, better food, better wife. I don't know about that, but you get the idea. It's the pairing of the money, the secondary reinforcer with the primary. It's the pairing of the good grade with what it might help you to get. So that's primary and secondary reinforcers. The last thing I want to talk about is shaping of behavior, right? So the term shaping of behavior is extremely important, right? Shaping behavior basically means that you're working your way toward the desired goal of behavior that want to build in someone. And so shaping behavior usually is a stepwise process, because it's not so easy just to say to someone, here, you want to make a bed, just go ahead and do it, and this is how you do it. People don't usually learn that way. They learn things in a stepwise progression, especially if they have no idea how to do something. So let's take the example of brushing your teeth as a for instance. You can teach someone to brush their teeth by using what we call successive approximations, or otherwise known as forward chaining, right? And that's basically sequencing events in little pieces that eventually, when put together, will make up the process of toothbrushing. So you start at the beginning and you put take out the toothpaste, you take out the toothbrush, you put your toothpaste on the toothbrush, and you give someone a star for a reinforcement, and you say, great job. And that is forward chaining, or successive approximations, because they've completed the first step. Then the next time, once they get the toothpaste on the brush down, you say, okay, now put the toothpaste on the brush, pick it up, and put it in your mouth. And then you reinforce that step with 2 stars, right? And so that's how you build your repertoire toward the finished product, which is eventually being able to brush your teeth. So that's definitely one way to shape behavior, is through successive approximations. There is another way to build behavior, and this is called backward chaining. And backward chaining shapes behavior, but using the opposite process. You start with the finished product, okay? So let's take something like bed making, okay? I'll give that as an example. So instead of starting with the first step, which would be to start with a bare bed and just reinforce someone for, let's say, putting the sheet on the bed, instead, you start with a completely finished bed made, right? And then you take the cover down from the pillow and you say, okay, in order to earn reinforcement, all you have to do is put that cover back up over the pillow. Then you earn reinforcement. And that starts the backward chaining, right? Then, after the subject has that piece of it down, you take that same blanket and you fold it down off the pillow and then down to the end of the bed, right? And you say, okay, now in order to earn reinforcement, you have to bring the blanket up to the pillow and then put it up and over the pillow. And then you get reinforced. So you're taking a finished product and you're going backwards to successively build the repertoire that you need in order to successfully make a bed at the beginning, toward the beginning. But you're reinforcing the person at every step. So you're starting with the finished product and you're working your way backwards, peeling off the onion backwards, so that eventually you get to the beginning and they can do the entire process. It's the way in which you look at the problem. Is it better taught from the front part backwards, or from the first step forward? Okay, so that gives us an idea about what exactly reinforcement is about. Hopefully that was relevant to you. And remember, reinforcement is relative. So this will be for week 6, and then next week will be your quiz. So you will not have a videotape next week on YouTube. You'll just have your quiz. You'll have all the week to work on that. Make sure to get that in on time. And then we'll resume with the video recordings. In week 8, you will find another YouTube video for you to explain what's going on. Keep reading your book and keep working on your presentations. And as always, you can email me with your questions. Thank you, everybody, and have a good one. Good luck on the quiz.